one that works? Hello? Is it working? Okay. I'm Barbara Bowie Whitman, and I work on my own these days. I went to a Republican delegation breakfast in Cleveland wearing the TPP t-shirt from our goodie bag from the trade front. I was immediately attacked by a very sincere evangelical lady who called me a globalist, and that I couldn't possibly be for Trump if I wore that t-shirt. And I gave her a couple of arguments about why TPP was, hey, we've got 6 people that are already have agreements among themselves and a bunch that don't, and we've improved the agreements among all of us. She looked at me very skeptically. And the next morning she came around and hugged me and said, I prayed about this, and I think you're right. So occasionally we win an argument. But
Having God on your side helps, by the way.
What?
Having
Yes.
God on your side helps.
God's a free trader? Well, we're not sure. We think he ought to be. Anyway, we come back to, the question comes back to something. You've made some very important points about the fact that none of us argued back against the anti-trade stuff during the campaign because there were other things that, as the data showed, were taking a more prominent role. But when I remember when NAFTA first passed, the Canadians went all around town and all around the country, and they would say, I have a secret. NAFTA's a success. And the Americans aren't telling me that. We have failed in telling that. So how do we communicate the things that are successful? And the other big point is the fact that we know trade is only a small part of the perception that everything's gone downhill economically. You have talked, Bill, in the past about training to bring people hurt by trade into the jobs where there's really vacancies. How do we match that?
Okay, great question. Michael, do you want to start?
Yeah, I actually just wanted to jump in on that because Bill made me think about it. We've done a lot of work now across the trade issue, both with organizations specifically and then broadly with the media company. I think what Bill said is spot on about companies not engaging on this issue, but I think the same counterpoint is that it can't necessarily be the big companies that are articulating this to the American public. They're probably the ones that are going to need to be the ones that fund it, but it's going to have to come from more voices than just Caterpillar or FedEx or GE. And I actually think FedEx, so we had a chance to work with FedEx. They just launched the Small Business Trade Index, powered by Morning Consult. I think it's the right step in the right direction. Turns out if you're a small business and you're engaged in trade, over 15% more likely to support these types of initiatives. But what we saw in other research that we've done in this space is that 42% of Americans want to hear from the average worker on the value of trade. So it's going to have to be these organizations engaging multiple stakeholders. It's going to have to be politicians engaging in a town hall fashion. It's just, I think the clarification I make is that they have to engage, but they have to not just do it from a top-down strategy. I think it has to be much more organic so that the woman that you meet in a convention setting, she's not just hearing about it from a commercial from GE or from Caterpillar, and it's definitely not effective to run TV ads in the DMA on Meet the Press. Like, those people have already made up their mind. It's much more effective to find ways to engage people as the 45% of Americans that haven't heard or thought about this issue or haven't made up their mind.
Excellent answer. And please be preparing your next question. I think that summed it up very well. And we'll, in an attempt to try to have as many questions as possible, we'll just work our way around the room. The gentleman right here, please.
Thank you. Steve Landy, Manchester Trade. I don't stand up because I want to look like I was standing up. But I'm going through my own catharsis. I talked to Bill about this yesterday. We lost the election. We didn't lose the election because people don't understand trade. We lost the election because there were some serious dislocations from trade that we do not recognize, we do not accept, we blame on other things. So I'm sitting here, USTR graduate, saying to myself, what do you do? What changes should we make in our trade policy? Not defense, not new agreements. I came up with like 10, but I'll mention 3 very quickly. Not so much to discuss them, although I'm happy to, but more to say that everybody should be thinking of them and putting them on the table. Number 1, orderly marketing agreements, horrible things. They restricted trade. We outlawed them in the WTO GATT negotiations. They did one beautiful thing. They went to people who were hurting from trade and said, you're free for 5 or 10 years. And what happened? We don't have a television industry. We don't have any objection. We don't have a footwear industry. We don't have any objection, and so on. 2, USTR, I'll go fast. USTR, there were no, New York is always right. There was no question about negotiations, but they are isolated from the people. They have business advisors. They do not do have business advisors, but do not talk when the people who are against trade. We got to focus on that, figure out how to do that. And third, we negotiate our FTAs, and we're very happy with the global figures. We should make sure that our exports increase, move away from the legalistic stuff and say, if this sector has not increased, we will work with Mr. Country to do it. Enough talk. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you for your question, which I understand to be how do we change or what do we do to change trade policy? Would anyone like to tackle that first?
I'll just two thoughts, and these are tactical, right? I think first of all, for any of the Republicans in the room, we have to find people who are in this worldview who are willing to go into the administration, right? And to create, this is not going to be an easy administration for many people to go into for various reasons, right? And but if you notice, there's been no talk about who's going to be the next USTR, and the Commerce Secretary that's being floated as somebody who owns coal mines, right? And I think that we all know about the sort of the infrastructure of the family here. We've got to do our best to make sure that we get good people in to create a counterbalance to the rhetoric and the direction that Trump is, let's just be clear, right? We all know he's a deal guy, and everyone is sort of praying and hoping that at the end of the day, he's willing to cut deals. The arguments that he made around globalization, trade, and the global system were so central to his identity that it's just hard for me to imagine how he just abandons this altogether, right? And so we know that he's talked about slapping tariffs on China immediately. We know he's talked about slapping tariffs on Mexico and ripping up NAFTA immediately. This is a clear and present danger to the entire global trading system, right? I mean, this could happen in January, February. And so I think, first of all, getting people to create more of a counterbalance inside the Republican Party, right? I mean, this is not, the Democrats are going to be very limited in our ability to influence any of this anymore. And the second thing I just would posit to you is that the question I want all of you to think about is that should USTR be moved inside of the Commerce Department and to connect it to the broader economic conversation that's going on. I am beginning to believe that the isolation of USTR is a structural problem because it is disconnecting the trade conversation from the broader economic conversation. And so my answer to you is that go back to basic economics 101. There is a limit to what you can do with trade policy. The question is, what do we do with public investment, education reform, infrastructure investment, all these other things that all of you have been running around telling the rest of the world that are the elements of growth, right? That are essential for any developing economy, that if you don't have these other additional elements, the limits, I think in some ways we've all exaggerated to some degree the import of trade policy in its role inside of broader economic policy. And we have to get the economic policy right. And I just want to say that as a Democrat, one of the things that I think we should be worried about is that the Republicans last year in their disaggregation of TAA from TPA in the House was a bad sign of where this is all going, right? Because it would have been better if everything we're hearing, right, for the Republicans and the Democrats to work together to make sure that we were dealing with dislocation as part of TPA. It took the Republicans rejected that as a matter of policy. It's the first time that we disaggregated TAA from the TPA kind of stuff in the entire modern history of this movement that we've been part of, right? That's a bad sign of the trajectory of this. And so my point is we have to reconnect the trade agenda, I think, with the broader economic agenda. And I think the Republicans rhetorically in the House are talking about growth, right? I mean, let's give them the benefit of the doubt that that's a serious commitment. And I think we can leverage off of that in having a new dialogue. Remember Bush in 2001, the first proposal after Bush won in 2000 was that they were going to disband USTR and move it back underneath the Commerce Department, right? And I put out a thing saying it was ridiculous, we can't touch it, right? I don't know anymore. I don't know. And I think that this is part of my big argument to all of you is that, we all have to get reconnected to this broader conversation around growth, prosperity, wages and incomes, and in order, I think, for us to succeed.
Okay,
Yeah.
Bill, yes, and then I'd like to get to more questions.
Yeah, and let me just, because Jerry mentioned something, and just to build on the comments. And by the way, you don't have to take notes. I did a writing that's on the website that's good last week, which might be worth looking at. But let me just retell a story that's in that writing. When I started out with Caterpillar, one of my big jobs was I was involved with Three Gorges Dam in China. And I went there in 1993, and I'm touring the site where they're going to build this dam. And this really nice Chinese official took me aside. And my goal was to try to endear myself so they'd buy Caterpillar equipment, and XM would fund it. And this one nice Chinese official took me aside, and I looked like I was 16 years old, put his arm around me, and he said, you know, the problem with China is that we have so many people, it's better to have 100 people with shovels than one person with a Caterpillar bulldozer. And so I paused, I'm sort of a, smart, I'm sort of not politically correct at times, and I go, hey, have you ever thought about getting 1,000 people with spoons? And he looked at me and he said, that's ridiculous, and he was very offended. And then he goes, but you made your point. So let's just use that as an example. If you're one of those Chinese workers, did you lose your job because of technology? Or did you lose your job because of the imports? Because they did buy some equipment from us. Jerry's talking about all these disruptive technologies that are coming. There's going to be a lot of displacement. We can have trade adjustment assistance, and that's what we play around with, and it's usually a pretty modest program. It gets bipartisan support. Or we can have something that's more robust, that's adjustment assistance, that deals with all the changes that are going to take place, whether you lose your job because you imported a Caterpillar bulldozer, or is it a modern bulldozer, or is it a imported thing that created the disruption? It shouldn't matter. If you lose your job, there should be something that makes it easier for you to adjust and get a better job or an equal job, what have you. So anyway, whether that's going to change people's views on trade or technology, probably not, but it would make life a lot easier for all of us out there. And it's not a cost driver when it comes to the U.S. budget.